Chairmen, we're back, and nice to see you all, as always. Good to have Grant back. I know we've had him for one episode, but we missed him for one episode. Now we have him back, and it feels much better to have the trio reunited.
Yes.
Today we're going to talk about our hardest rigs that we've ever built, our most complicated, most frustrating rigs. And I feel like you guys actually should really be leading it here, because a lot of the most complicated rigs that I ever built, I don't even know that I have pictures of them. You know, it was a long time ago. So maybe this would be more appropriate for somebody that, and you know, I'm also not really building pedal boards anymore, so I don't get to be in the throes of these complicated rigs that people are asking for. You guys are dealing with it. You have boots on the ground. I almost feel like you guys need to direct me and tell all of us that are listening or watching about these complicated rigs. I'll do my best to remember the ones that were really complicated, but I won't have the cool multimedia experience that both Brian and Grant will have. So maybe I'd turn this over to you guys and you start walking us through the most difficult rigs that you've ever built, most complicated, most frustrating. I want to hear about it from you.
Brian, I think you got a couple. Do you want to start off with one of them?
Yeah, I'll start off with it. None of the rigs were frustrating. They were just real complicated. Just because there was a lot of pedals. A big part of it is like when someone ships in their rig and like everything is set and like, you know, we know what we're gonna do, and then like they've watched a video or they've seen someone else do it in a different way, and like the board's already like 75% of the way done, and they're like, oh, how easy is it to just do this? I'm like, okay, well, it takes this much time, and they're like, oh no, let's not do that. Like, I'm always like, okay, like we're at in the process. So let me share this one if I can go to it. You guys can see that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I remember,
Right.
I think, seeing this on when it was coming together and materializing on Instagram.
Yeah, so so I'm gonna swipe all the way through. Okay, oh, that's another one. Okay, so this one it started off as 2 trays, okay, and it was in a much smaller rack. And then as time went on, this gentleman, he's a great guy, he just has a lot of, great different types of pedals, and he was like, I just have this idea of throwing everything into a rack and having like this end-all studio rig. I'm like, okay, let's do it. So dreamed up the ideas, 1 gizmo, 2 trays, real simple, and then kind of started evolving to needing more, if I want to swap stuff out, how does that work? I was like, okay, well, we went through the options. He goes, I don't want to have to pull stuff off. So we just kind of went through and started adding another tray, and then we added another tray, needed a gizmo. And like, as time went on, we just kept adding more trays because he kept coming up with some more ideas. And this is partially before the build. I would say we started the build with 4 trays, and then we evolved to the top tray and the very bottom tray. So the top tray became like his direct in Iridium. You can see the I think it's the Zelza, the Strymon,
Yep.
that purple one.
Yep.
That pedal and the one next to it, I can't quite remember the name of it. I think that's
Microcosm?
Yes, the Microcosm. Those and the Maris Enzo like all kind of evolved into like, what about a direct in kind of wacky, all midied rig? So like that whole top tray is all just midied pedals. I mean, there's more than 16 MIDI channels, and let alone the fact that there's 2 effects gizmos and a mini gizmo, like the one that has the reordering that they came out with. Actually, you'll see it in the other photo right here. Down at the bottom, there's a mini effects.
Man.
There's another mini effects gizmo. So there's just so much going on. So for me, this was like 100 and something hours of between wiring and programming. Programming was like insane amount of programming, because not only, if you look at the trays, almost every pedal on here is midied, pretty much every single one of them, except the protein and the analog man. And I mean, everything else is MIDI. So not only did we have to do the gizmos with the GT22 for MIDI, like we had to send MIDI commands. So a lot of these devices, it was a matter of writing down what functions they wanted to do, what features, and mostly he wanted to do as much as he possibly could. So it was like a lot of just like spreadsheets of, okay, these 4 pedals are on the same MIDI channel. These ones will do this type of banking up via CC, or these will do banking down. Oh, you'll only want to do expression for these things. Like it just became such a crazy, complicated thing, which it was a lot of fun. It was just like there was just a lot of writing down, a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails. He lives locally, just like an hour away. So he would drive over and bring some stuff where we talk about just like different things that we were doing. So it just became one of those things. It kept evolving, and over time, as you can tell, there's a lot of undoing and redoing, and every tray has its own power supply. Like, and there's 2 rack power units at the bottom. It's just like, it was over the top, and it was the heaviest thing ever. I had to fit it in my Forerunner and like take it to him and load it in and program it. Like I said, the GT22 has 16 pages of options, and I think we utilized all 16 pages. So all 16 pages times 22 buttons. Like every button had a CC command or PC command or like an expression command, and it was nuts. So that was the most complicated build I've ever had.
I mean, is this guy like a professional guitar player?
No, he does gigging throughout the DFW area. Like he doesn't travel or anything. So this is like,
I can't imagine that this would be travelable for him though, unless he had like a road crew.
Yeah, like I think so. I got it out of my car by like sliding it off of my bumper and like got it down, and it was like 150 plus pounds. Like it was massive.
Jeez.
The shell alone was insane. So this actually just lives. I have a photo somewhere on my Instagram of it's in his whole studio space. He's a very much of a he collects and he plays. He's a great player, and he gigs and sings. So like he has all of his acoustics, electrics, his whole sound console, or mixing computer and piano. Like he has a lot of different amp heads. And also got to mention, this has MIDI out that go to an amp head switcher that was switching between 4 different amp heads, 4 different cabinets, which there was a aux box cabinet, there was a 212, a 112, and there was one other kind of like the aux direct in option with like 2 rocks and bad cats and all these like different heads. So like he had a lot of different options, which is great. It was just one of those things that when we got done, my boss and I looked at each other and we're like, we're probably never going to do one of these again. As fun as it really was a lot of fun. My desk base was insane because there's 32, 34 pedals literally all over the desk, in the shelves, in the trays, and it just became so. Yeah, that was the great rack of 2020. I think I did that during COVID or at the end of it.
I remember this one. I remember this one for sure.
It was
it had to be fairly new because the Zelza's only like 6 months old or something like that.
Okay, yeah. So it was like in the end of 2020, going into 2021. But yeah, it was literally like I was finishing up the rack and the Zelza came out, and I messaged him as he was messaging me about putting the Zelza on. So then that opened up to Tray 6 and the direct in option. So there was a whole bunch. There's actually some extra stuff that aren't even pictured that when I got to his house, we ended up installing some Pro Di2 direct boxes like to the back of the rack and stuff because for his Iridium and stuff. So yeah, that was the rack that, I'll probably never do racks again unless it's.
If you're listening to this, you'll have to reference on our YouTube channel what this looks like because it is an absolutely insane rack that clearly Brian indulged one of probably the craziest whims. I mean, the expense of this thing alone at 100 hours had to be pretty crazy. So I guess this guy was really committed to
$500 at least in labor.
Right. Yeah, just $500.
Oh yeah. It took me like 6 hours to do this.
Yeah. Just a quick build.
If
No
anyone
big
ever
deal.
said that, I'd be like, no.
That's beautiful,
super easy.
man. Well
Like
done.
it's beautiful. It really it was beautiful to do. I will say it was probably one of my proudest moments because of posting this. I started getting a lot of traction through social media, and I gained a bunch of followers, which was cool. And of all that, Robert Bradshaw was like messaged me a few times about or commented or liked a picture of the racks, and I was like, why does that name sound really familiar? Because it wasn't his name, it was his company, the company name. And I asked my boss, and he's like, oh no, that's Robert Bradshaw. So I thought that was really cool because I've watched so many of his builds and stuff growing up. Did I just lost you guys? Back to it. Yeah. So it was a really cool build to be able to see and get some, comments from people that I've been following for years and this kind of stuff. So of all that kind of stuff, the racks were just like, I'll probably never do a rack again unless it's someone like really special that like wants one done. But of boards, because not all of us can carry around a 175-pound rack, 6 tray, 34 pedals with a massive 32x16 flat board with controller. I would say the Josh Smith board I did on this Schmidt array was probably the most. I had to search a lot because not all my boards are like really crazy. All this like in the beginning, wet, dry, wet, like all this kind of like cabling did feel complicated, but after I've been doing it for a while, it doesn't feel as complicated. I would say this one was because Josh reached out and was like, he knew what he wanted. He knew the placement that he wanted. He sent me the exact signal chain, the exact which pedals needed to be on the batteries. So like, it was like easy to actually like kind of like throw together, but some of the routing got really complicated when it became like this, the pedal right next to the MC8,
the myriad.
Yeah. That one, because we utilized like the effects loop part of it and the expression on the. I don't have a picture of the side port, but it's the one over here.
Yep.
Like that whole thing, it just like all the routing, as well as the poly. That was another big one too, because the poly has like one input is a TRS, so it's like input 1, 2,
right,
and then the next one is input 3, 4, and then output. So there's a lot of TRS splitting, and how he was routing certain effects into it and then out of it and then back into it and doing his different signal chains, that it just started getting like, if it was something that I had to come up with, it wouldn't have been as like tedious. But Josh had a certain reason why he wanted it, which was great. The biggest of like all, not issues, but like things we had to factor in was just space. Honestly, it was just like, how are we going to fit everything in here? Because if you look at this, you don't really see power supplies anywhere on this board.
Right.
It's because I had to have fixed Pedalboards build me a custom size fixed riser. So the MC8, the Merit, and the Polytune are actually on a riser like that was.
Oh, I can kind of see
out.
the screw mounts through it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it.
So that's how that is sitting. So there's actually two. Josh sent the Voodoo Lab X4, so the really tiny power supplies. So I think it was two of them, or there's I think it's two of them. I can't. No, okay. So I misspoke. We had the two X4s on here, but then we needed more power, so we ended up putting two Ohais instead of the X4s, just because the 4s only had 4 outputs. We needed more.
Got it.
So we put two of the smaller Ohais underneath the mirrored Polytune spot, and then right to the left, I wish I had a photo of this, but I don't, is the newer one control Josh Smith switchless like stereo MIDI stereo loop box. We actually have two of them, one for the H9, and then I want to say the other one was something with the poly. It's been so long since I've done it.
So that was just because there wasn't enough loops in the hex for the stereo effects. Got it.
Yeah, and there was nothing else the hex size not even the RGM gizmo is smaller, as
Right.
as small as the hex. It's just hex is really skinny, which is great.
Yeah.
And we had to utilize the volume loop, and then I had to open up the box to actually do like a jumper. So like if the volume wasn't being utilized, it just summed it back to the board without him having to use the patch cable. So there was a lot of little nitty gritty things that we had to do, and
Do
kind of
you
just
jumper
like
it? You
put
jumper
together.
to loop inside the hex?
No, so the hex, it's input and then it's a send and return. Like if you were putting like a volume or something. And, and then the other loops. So we went from loop 1, send to the junction box, and then inside the junction box, I actually wired the lead, the tip lead from the send to the return in the box. So when it came back into the box, if he wasn't utilizing that volume,
Oh, I see.
like if something wasn't plugged in, plugged in, he didn't have to throw a little patch bay in there or something like that.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So I could have done a switch or something, but he didn't want to have to worry about switches. So we just, it's very tight inside those patch boxes.
Yeah.
So we just made it real simple, and everything else ran to the pedals. I mean, there's the batteries was another big one, because some of the pedals react differently with the batteries. So all around, it was like I said, it was an amazing build. It was fun. He's on tour with it right now with Joe Bonamassa, and it's fun to see, him play on it and love it. And it's doing everything. The poly was a big, pedal that I never had the chance of messing with. So it was a big learning experience. Luckily, it came pre-programmed. So Josh had everything in it, and he's like, this is what patch you need to test it on. All the MC8 stuff, which is amazing. I don't have an MC8, but I've worked on a few of these controllers, and he had all that pre-programmed. So it was like a nice experience to have everything pre-programmed. It was just assembling it and making it fit.
Yeah.
So that's it for me. I'm gonna stop sharing. But yeah, that's
great, man.
Those are my complicateds.
Wow.
Well, all right.
Yeah.
I guess we're done, and we'll see you guys next week for another episode. No, that's cool, man.
Those are some gorgeous rigs there, Brian, for sure.
Thank you.
And again, if you're not looking at this, if you want to see what Brian just shared, definitely come over to the YouTube channel. It's the Vertex Effects YouTube channel, and then we have all of this available for your visual pleasure. And those were absolutely outstanding. And sometimes those small rigs are deceptive, I'll say, because sometimes people look at them and they go, oh, yeah, it's pretty simple. But I mean, doing all the effects loops in different versions of those pedals, and then having to route those and involve the switcher, because basically he's using a switcher. He's just disaggregated the loops from the controller. So the MC8 is the controller, and then the send and return loops are incorporated through the hex and the one control stereo loop MIDI controlled boxes. So it's a much more complicated rig than it looks, for sure.
Oh yeah, there's a lot under the hood. There's the planning when it goes into just like a normal Kemper run is pretty simple, but when you have to factor in 5 different types of runs, MIDI, multiple loops, expression, there's just so much like painter's tape with tape on it with what it is, but then a piece of zip, then a zip tie zipped around, 5 of the cables labeled this run. Like it was just, it was,
wow.
It was fun. It was just
how many hours was that one?
I did it. I had it on a Monday and I had it out by a Friday, but I think I worked Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, like 8. I think I was 8:30 to 6 every day. I skipped lunches. Like I worked like a lot of hours, I would say, to just knock it out, because there was just so many details.
Yeah.
So I mean, whatever that math is, it was
a
lot of work.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, and it was a lot of back and forth, especially just kind of getting information from him too, just so I didn't, because California is so far further from Texas, that like any little thing that if it's wrong has to come back. So it was just a lot of like double checking, triple checking, and it was great though. And I love building. I did a similar board for him, but a smaller one, but it wasn't as complicated, but it was still very like space consumed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Poly is a really cool pedal as well for anyone that hasn't seen it or used it. A little cumbersome to learn how to program it, but I think the only time I've had it in the shop 1 or 2 times, we did a board for Ariel Posen, and I had to program it, and it was back and forth with Lockie from Poly to figure it out. But once you get like Lockie's approach to the pedal, it's a brilliant piece of gear and unbelievably detailed. I think it has 4 TRS input-output, so you could put it in 4 different places on your board, or you can run 2 different stereo signal paths. Like, it's a intense pedal, and it looks like an Etch-a-Sketch. So I mean, you can't go too wrong with it.
Right.
It should have been red.
Yeah, exactly. That might have been copyright infringement or something like that. But very, very fun multi-effects pedal for anyone that's looking for something a little different. Mason, do you have any that you want to chat about, or do you want me to go next? Where are you feeling?
I feel like let's stack the deck in favor of those that have pictorial, references,
visual aids
for this. And so I think you should go for it.
All right, let me see if I can figure out sharing my screen for those on YouTube. I'll try and make sure there's nothing other people shouldn't see here. Okay, let's see if this works. Okay, so this is a bit of a, it's not the most complicated in terms of size, but the thing that was complicated on this, I mean, obviously we just saw how incredible Brian is at creating these neat and complex boards and stuff. The thing I've personally always been really fascinated by is signal routing, and my favorite situation is when I'm on the phone with a customer and they start a sentence with something like, "I don't know if this is possible, but could we do this, and this?" And it inevitably hinges on creating a box that can reroute their signal depending on the situation in different ways without repatching any cables. And that's where my brain really comes to life. And I get the whiteboard out and start drawing things out. And this board took quite a few iterations of whiteboards, which in my mind means it's a bit more complicated. So for those that are on podcasts, it's basically, what do you think, Brian? Is that a 24 by 16?
24 by 16. Yeah, that's a Creation Aero.
The Aero board by Creation has an RJM PBC6X, which is a MIDI controller and true bypass looper in one, a riser, and a massive junction that we made for this guy on the top right. So, and it of course has the Vertex boost in there. So it's it's a cool board. It's not massive, but the routing is kind of where I had a lot of fun with it. So underneath the riser, there's power, and the kind of one of the keys to the board is a radial EXTC, which is a stereo reamp box. And guys, chime in if I'm missing any key details here, but reamping essentially allows you to record a dry take of guitar, no effects on it, just guitar into your recording software. And then you can, after the fact, after the guitar take has been recorded, you can, using this reamp box, you can run that signal back through your pedals using different combinations of sounds, amps, whatever you like, as if the guitar player was just endlessly playing a loop of that recording over and over again. The cool thing with the reamp box, the EXTC in stereo, is you can actually run a stereo reamped signal. So you could put a stereo synth or a stereo guitar signal that was just recorded, and you could run it straight into stereo effects. There's a few different things you can do there, but this guy, where it gets complicated, is he wanted multiple routing options. So he wanted to be able to run a stereo synth, as an example, into just his wet effects. And then without repatching, he wanted to run his mono guitar through only his dry effects. And then he also wanted to run his mono guitar through his dry and wet, and stereo guitar into just wet. So he wanted a bunch of different options without repatching. And so essentially what we have, what's the next one here? That's just the bottom of the board. That one's just for Brian.
Oh yes.
Um,
I love the Mondays.
So this is the junction, and this is kind of what allows all that to happen. So I put labels on here because I don't think you'll see my mouse since we're sharing screens. But on the bottom right, you see input with reamp. So he plugs his guitar into the input, which is the bottom left jack there. And instantly he can send a signal back to his recording software and record a dry guitar. So that's just a buffered split. There's nothing too fancy about that. Then on the left-hand side, you see the radial EXTC interfacing jacks. And that's basically a stereo send, stereo return that always plugged into the radial. And then lastly, on the top right, you have a wet, dry, wet output. So irregardless of reamping, you can run this box and pedalboard as a wet, dry, wet setup, wet, dry, stereo, mono, all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And then on this side, I won't go through every label here, but essentially you have all the pedalboard interfacing jacks. And the key label here is the bottom left side here. You have the left toggle, and that basically is the key and what really took the most amount of planning. If it's in the up position, you can use the radial as a stereo reamp box, which is what it's designed for. If you put the toggle down, it'll reroute the signal so that it can be run in mono. So I had to check with radial to make sure this was doable, that the box would handle what we needed it to. But
another one of your countrymen, radial.
Exactly. Actually pretty close by. They're here in BC as well. So shout out to radial. But yeah, basically it allows him to then run his guitar through everything on his board, mono and stereo effects, or just his stereo effects, and it bypasses the first half of the pedal board. And then he's got an audition here that he can run in mono or stereo if he wants to try out a pedal, and the other toggle is just a manual bypass of the audition if he doesn't want to unplug the jacks on the other side. But really, I guess the crux of the board is this final diagram here. Right. It kind of sums it up. So he can run basically a mono signal to just his dry pedals, like I was saying. He can run a mono send stereo return through the reamp, and then he can run a stereo send stereo return. And at any point, he can use his dry amp output as well and capture kind of that signal also. So that was kind of the funnest one, I'd say, out of the last year. As far as it was a little bit different. He knew, kind of similar to what Brian said, he came in knowing what he wanted. It was more just, is it possible? And can we figure it out? And so yeah, I think in as far as the setups go, excuse me, I'm gonna cough. Sorry. That was a really fun one from the last year or so. Yeah, I don't think there's really much else to talk about. I mean, the pedals were great. It was pretty straightforward after the planning phase was done, which as a side note, I would say for anyone doing their own rigs or planning this stuff out, plan like crazy. Come up with any alternative scenario, like in terms of testing that your idea is actually going to work before you start laying pedals down. I know I've made the mistake, talking about frustrations, of just starting to get to work and thinking like, I'll figure it out as I go. And inevitably, I just waste hours of time. And so the planning is really do the test, do the audio test with the gear, put it down on the ground, and see what you can come up with. And you'll be glad. It'll be well invested time before you actually start putting Velcro or dual lock on pedals. You'll be glad that you did this. So that's probably the board, the most complicated board from the last year or so. Exactly.
Yeah, they both. We
always want to get the board done and just get back to playing, but just spend the extra hour or two and just do it right the first time, please. Yeah.
Hey, can I add one more to the side before? To the picture side. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought about this as we were talking. You guys are going.
Oh, sorry. I'll stop sharing here. One sec.
No, you're good. We good?
I'm sorry. My mouse has disappeared.
No, you're good.
There it is.
There you go.
All right. So this was one that it wasn't, the whole routing wasn't complicated. It was mounting one thing on a board.
I remember that one.
This one. Yeah.
Nice.
So the routing of it all was not hard. It was like 2 fixed risers of 2 different sizes. But yeah, it was figuring out how to mount the toaster, I would say, on the board.
And this was a serious build. This wasn't a joke. This was
100%. If I can zoom in, I don't know. You can see it. If Instagram will let me. Nope, it's not gonna let me. Yeah, it's all routed. It's all wired.
That's crazy.
Did a April Fool's one with like an amp head or something as like a joke a while ago, but that was fake. This one fully real. Everything was in the PBC6, but it was like routing sends and returns and doing stereo in the PBC in the Kemper, and then on the back side I had a patch panel for different sends and returns and XLRs and quarter inches. But yeah, it was like the guy was like, is it possible? I'm like, no, it's possible. It's just figuring out how I'm gonna mount the Kemper on there and also allow for like fan, like the space in the back for it to air out properly. So yeah, I had to add that to the pile.
Can I ask why?
He said he needed it on there for it to be more compact and portable.
Okay.
And I just said okay. And it's tall. It's very tall. It's a 32 by 16 board, but the case I think was like 15, 16 inches deep. It was like a trunk.
You'd have to lift it up from the top. Hey, like the handle would almost have to be on the top of the thing, not the side. Yeah.
Well, it went in like a live-in thing. So he just put and it had wheels and everything on it.
Oh man.
But yeah, it was just one of those things like, okay, all right, let's try it. I mean, and he's like, is it going to hurt it? And I reached out to Kemper and I was like asking, he's like, as long as there's, the fan space and everything and it's getting proper air. And it's been a couple of years. I mean, since it's been probably over 2-3 years since I've done this one, at least from what I can remember. But yeah, I had to add that to the pile. It was still a great build and he loves it, just all the options. And that was also one of my first times I got to work with that Empress. I think it's a reverb or delay. I can't remember. I think it's a delay.
That's the white one?
Delay. Yeah, the white one, right?
Yeah.
Right here. I can't see that. Whatever that is. The Echo System. Yeah, so that was like one of my first times. So, but yeah, no, that was, I had to add that one to it. So, yeah,
nice.
Mounting that Kemper. How about you, Mason?
All right, well, I actually did find some of one pedal board that I remember being remarkable to this end. It sort of along the lines of what Brian said, where it was a pedal board that continued to evolve after the initial sort of like concept was established, and that can make things really difficult because you're sort of going after a moving target. And so in essence, when I delivered the pedal board, like probably a third of the devices changed.
Oh man.
So we were having to make changes at the delivery, and I think that there was like a misunderstanding between the customer as far as like, oh yeah, we'll just change out these couple of things and it's no big deal. And it was like, well, these have like different jack like placements, like where the input and output jacks are, where the power jack is, the size of the pedal is different, so it's not exactly like a one-to-one thing. And I think that this was actually back in 2000. I think I did this in 2010. This is a long time ago. It's a long time ago. And so I don't remember it necessarily being so complicated. I'll tell you what was complicated is there was a lot of mods that we did. There's a lot of mods, and there was a lot of just small customizations that at the time I had never done before. So let me share the screen with you. And again, if you want to see exactly what we're working with, definitely follow us over on the YouTube side, because you won't be able to see this obviously through podcast formation. So let's see. Share this here. All right. So this is kind of the rough before and after, and again, just take into account that this is about 2010. So, the quality of the images do not resemble today's images. This is how we started over here on the left, and it's a little bit, murky. You can't really see everything completely well. Even on the right side, the newer photos, it's not exactly 100%. But yeah, you can kind of get a sense. So this is how we started. This is how we finished. Now let me bring into you some other. This is a better kind of completed shot one.
Yeah.
You can definitely see. So basically, the way that this thing started is I think it was really just supposed to be a stereo rig that incorporated some of this player's favorite devices. And there was nothing complicated in that. It was a serial pedal board. It was designed to go in front of kind of vintage Fenders and Voxes and stuff like that. And so there was no effects loop. There wasn't any kind of crazy wet dry wet routing. But the number of mods that we did were pretty insane. So like we modified this GE7. I think what I did is I put like kind of like a version of what I had learned from the Monty Allams mods that were around at the time, and I kind of did something to kind of just quiet it down, improve the op amps. I don't think I did any frequency changes like how Exactone does now. But again, this was way before that. We had one of these limited edition fuzzes that we made that we collaborated with Paul Trombetta on to make sort of like this hybrid kind of fuzz face style BC109 silicon based fuzz. I rehoused an ODR1. This is way before, again, Exactone was offering these services, and, put the, Noble's decal on the front and repurposed their faceplate and all that stuff. That was a real pain to get all the drilling right. I think I modified this optocompulator to take a 2.1 millimeter barrel instead of the 1/8 inch barrel. I modified the TC Electronic flanger stereo chorus pitch shifter for an 18 volt instead of the 9 volt, or instead of the AC cord. Jeez. I modified this panning tremolo so that it would be true bypass. I did the foot switch mods and some of the hi-fi mod things to some of the not hi-fi mods, the foot switch mods, and then some of the corrective issues with the stereo outputs on this so that you wouldn't get that weird level drop that sometimes happens on this. So I just remember it being and I don't know if I did this, but certainly these were rerouted to the side instead of the top, because maybe I did that because we couldn't fit it against where this riser is. And so we rerouted the input and output jack to the side of the tube driver. Just like for the time, it was I remember it being a significant amount of like customized options that was very labor intensive. And then I think like half the overdrive pedals ended up changing when I got there, because like I think that some of the other devices they want, and this is actually I delivered this to Jim Henson Studios in LA, and then I was working on like a tech bench in a hallway that sort of was like the main feeder hallway to all the separate studios. And this is actually when I met Sheryl Crow, and I think I've told this story before where I met Sheryl Crow. Sheryl Crow got me some lunch, got me working out there all day, and so shout out Sheryl Crow. Was very kind and conscientious and observant of somebody who certainly at that time in 2010 I would have been 25. So in any case, this was quite a rig. This is one of the first times I ever used a kind of like a riser system that resembled this, where basically we had like a platform that the power supplies lived under. I remember riveting on. You can see how I put some blind rivets to hold in some of those tie down mounts, because there wasn't an easy way to do it. I was using these Italian-made connectors for everything called ST Professional, which actually were really good. It was just not something that I could get reliably. They had very low capacitance, which I liked, and the whole assembly was really good. I also had to, you see this custom bend on the Vertex riveted logo here that went over the early line 6. Some of the stuff I look at and I was just like, well, why didn't I just move it like over here or I don't know.
It needed to be centered, man.
Yeah, it needed to be centered, but some of those old, the newer line 6, and you can see here the mod that I did to it, where I actually put trim pots on the left and right outputs here, because they were actually, even when you corrected the issue of this, where, you know, again, the issue that a lot of people had is when they would run it, they would get like kind of like a dropped output on one side. So basically I gave like a makeup gain for the left and right, so you could trim out the two outputs so that you would match them up to be unity. And basically what I was doing there is I just put two new output buffers on there that had just a variable volume control. So it was pretty involved, actually, separately from replacing the switches. But yeah, this was just like, I just remember it. I remember it taking a while just to kind of figure out like how to get it to all fit on this pedal board. And again, I don't think it's even necessarily more complicated than anything. It's presumably less complicated than anything that you guys had done. I guess at the time, I just had never had to do this level of customization for everything. I just remember it taking a really long time and having to, you know, go in and do these changes to some of the pedals. It looks like I put some sort of insert. I don't even remember all the things I did to it. But at the end of the signal path, it all goes into this giant Pete Cornish booster splitter isolator box, which I had never seen before at the time. And this particular customer had an incredible long history with Pete Cornish and was a big fan of Keith Scott, who was the guitar player for Bryan Adams, another Pride of Canada guitarist and an artist. And so he tried to replicate some of the pieces of gear that Keith Scott had and worked with Pete Cornish to get some of these custom units built. I think if there's any other cool photos here of it that has kind of another side view. At this time, I was also, just to point out how things have evolved, I was using kind of like a honeycomb style pedal board here, and you can kind of see the hexagonal kind of shape on the surface. These were awful to use because they are petroleum based, and so you kind of had to rough up the surface that the Velcro is going to stick to because it's petroleum based. It didn't stick very well. And I remember there was kind of like a pivot for a short time where I was trying to use these because they were so much lighter than just the laminated plywood that most people were using at the time. And I still see that there's some guys that use this, but if you want to use it effectively, you basically kind of have to trace out where the Velcro is going to go. And then you kind of have to either like sandpaper it or rough it up. Otherwise, like it will never fully adhere because the petroleum, the kind of like the oil content will just ultimately lift off the dual lock or whatever it is that you're using. I also just see that I'm using really huge full-size cable here.
I was going to ask you about that.
I think that he wanted me to use Belden 9778 because he was a big Michael Landau fan, and Michael Landau used the 9778. And so the whole rig is using Belden 9778 throughout.
Dude.
It's really, really a thick, robust cable for this application. I think the pedal board. What's that?
What are the pancakes? Are they like?
It's the same company, the same Italian company. They were called ST Professional. Again, they were really great at the time. They were the lowest profile pancake connector that you could get. This is way before square plugs.
It looks like the Hosa, like they did like that shape. Of that
it's a similar shape. It was a much better built thing than Hosa, and they kind of had this cool. I don't know if there's a picture of it from the side, but let's see if I can find a good example of it back here. No, these are all right angle. Yeah, so the thing that was cool about it is the set screw for the housing was actually only on one side. So one side had like a hook that you would like feed the housing through, and then the other side had a set screw. So, and then you would kind of crimp down the hook so that would hold it. And so it was kind of a cool idea that they had where it eliminated the amount of hardware that was needed. And it was a really nice tight fit once, you had assembled the connector. So it was really cool. I really liked them. Awesome. I kind of miss using them. I have a few of them around in the event that I ever got like a pedal board back that needed to sort of match the look. But otherwise, I've pretty much fully migrated onto square plugs for everything. It also looks like now that I'm noticing, it looks like I actually have like a buffer unit underneath this opto-compulator. And I wonder if that's because it's coming after this treble booster and fuzz. So I was like, okay, well, after we get through the low impedance or the high impedance sensitive, then we're going to go into this buffer that's just sitting underneath the opto-compulator. It's all coming back to me. I think this was a get off my case pedalboard surface and riser here. And I think
Okay.
I was just using like wood
yeah.
blocks to rise up everything or raise up everything except for the optocompulator, which is clearly on a. It looks like also I might have made this true bypass because the foot switch didn't usually have this washer there.
I actually have a funny story about Get Off My Case. I did a build with them, and for a guy, and a solid sturdy board and everything, and I like put all the pedals on, and I go to I usually lay out the order, put the Velcro on, and then put it on a shelf when I'm ready to build it, and all the pedals like sort of sliding off, and I was that's really weird. That's really weird. I don't understand why it's doing that. So I like go and try to stick it, and it's like you can see it. It's like I'm like that doesn't make. Why is it doing that? So I start feeling it, and I'm like, okay, well that feels really slick. So I called the rep, and he's like, oh yeah, sometimes you have to use sandpaper to rough it up for that spot. And I was like, okay, well it's the whole board. And he's like, are you sure? Try rubbing some dirt. So I went through all these different techniques he told me to do, and I was like, man,
He said rub some dirt.
Rub some dirt on it. He's like, rub some dirt all over the board. And I'm like,
the old dirt
never
trick.
Heard
You guys didn't try the old dirt trick?
No, I've never had. I was just like,
I've never heard
okay.
of that. I'm not throwing it under the bus, but I've never heard about the dirt trick.
Well, I was like, I've never. Oh, I'll try it. So like, threw some mulch around, grabbed the dirt, threw it on. It didn't do a thing. Yeah, I was like, okay, that didn't do anything, and I was just got this really dirty board. So he's like, okay, well, hold on, and he goes and asks those guys. And they, I guess, wiped down all their road cases with like WD-40 or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh.
So he goes, I think your board got mixed up in that batch. And I was like, okay. And so he sent me a new board, which is completely different of the material. Oh, the same material, just no WD-40. And he goes, is that better? And I was like, yep, everything's good. But it was an interesting thing to don't put WD-40 on plastic.
Why would you put that on the outside of a board? WD-40.
Well,
it makes the cases look really black.
Yeah. So he did it. His guys were spraying down all their cases.
Yeah.
And he says that it probably was just in the line that they just wiped it all down because it was like sitting there. But yeah, because I used to build road cases back in Michigan, and I did the same thing. We wipe down the case and makes it dark and makes it clean and everything. But on a pedal board, no, it is not a good thing.
Oh man.
Yeah. One thing that's actually if you're dealing with those Formica, which is what their pedal boards are typically, or any of the A&S Case Company pedal boards, or Chris Craft, if we're going way back to early flat surface pedal boards that are just laminated ply, sometimes they would put a petroleum like product to kind of wipe it down and clean it. And so whenever I would get them, you either have to use like nail polish remover or some sort of alcohol to kind of get any of the oil residue off.
Yeah.
Before you start mounting stuff, because otherwise you'll run into that same situation. But it's way worse with that honeycomb hexagonal material, which is really lightweight, but it has that issue where you can't really fully get the kind of the slickness off. And so I only used it for maybe a few boards before I went back to the other style, even though it was a lot lighter to use. It was the prep time that you had to invest was much higher, and ultimately I ended up not only sanding but using some really small finishing nails, like really really tiny ones, to kind of tack in the dual lock, because even sometimes with sanding it wasn't enough where it would kind of like pull up, and so it just wasn't like a good long-term solution. As cool as it, like when it was kind of used on pedal boards, I remember everybody was using it, whether it was A&S Case Company or Get Off My Case. A lot of people wanted to go that direction because it was light, but ultimately it just wasn't a good viable solution because of the adhesive issue.
Yeah. I usually use like a naphtha. I think that's the term for it. Or like a rubbing alcohol to wipe down.
Yeah.
Pretty much any platform. But it was one of those things. I was scratching my head like for a whole week trying to figure out what on earth is happening. So yeah. You
could say your pedal board had an oily T-zone.
Going through puberty.
You He's just sweating a lot.
Yeah. So, yeah. So those were three, or multiple rigs. A couple from Brian, a couple from Grant. One that was memorable for me. I guess some of the hardest ones, for me were a long time ago. And I wouldn't say that, maybe that rig was particularly hard. It was just, man, it took a long time and a lot of customizations. And like, I think the one thing that people underestimate about, people who are rig building is that this is not like we can't always take skills and replicate them on every single board. A lot of times we're having to create engineering solutions or workarounds that are specific to you, especially if you're coming to us and saying, well, I have this pedal and I need it to work with these other things. And sometimes that requires a mod, like those DL4s back then. They had this known issue with the volume drop and in the mixing of the stereo signal, and coming up with a solution to trim out each output separately. That was a real time-consuming challenge, and to figure out how to do it. And I kind of just did it in an effort to kind of know how to deal with that problem, because that was sort of the timeline equivalent of the day. Everybody used that DL4. Yeah. I think the irony of that whole thing, though, is I spent so much time on the DL4 and it looked like the M9 was just left totally stock, which had the same problems. So I don't know exactly. Maybe it was because this is what he had requested. I don't remember the context, but looking at it now, I was like, well, why didn't I do it to the M9? Because it had the same situation. But in any case, that was again over a decade ago. So some time had passed. Any last thoughts about complicated rigs, or maybe advice to those who are listening and or watching and are dealing with a complicated rig of their own, maybe in their DIY world, or maybe they're a rig builder for friends or for people in their church or people in their band? What's our advice to them when they're dealing with complications? What do you guys say?
I would probably just say, and this definitely comes from experience, when you feel stuck and you can't, like, something's going on with your board, you can't figure out what the issue is, just keep at it. It doesn't feel like it in the moment. In the moment, you're thinking of all the 4-letter words, you're ripping your hair out, you're going to town. But those are the moments that once you figure it out, if you're persistent, you will be such a better rig builder for making it through rather than giving up. So ask questions. If you're absolutely stuck, like, ask us questions. I'm sure that we've made all the mistakes, and hopefully learned from them. But I just look back at some of the most frustrating moments building rigs or doing signal routing, and they are some of the best lessons I've learned because of it. My beard is more gray because of them, but I'm also thankful for them at the same time. So I would just say, be persistent, ask questions after you've done everything you can do, because again, that's part of the learning process, and you'll figure it out, but stick with it.
Yeah. I would say I would add on to take your time. That's a huge part. Don't rush. Like, if you have a really complicated setup you want to do, and you have a gig you have to play in 2 days, maybe wait to do your build until after that gig or something. Because if you're rushing for the 2 days and you only have 4 hours to spend each day on it, you're gonna make mistakes. That's a huge part of mine. Like, this board right here, this is my board, and I'm working on it kind of throughout the next 2 weeks I have off, because there's things I want to change on it. But I know that all of the stuff that I want to do to it, I can't get done like that. Like, take your time, throw it together, make sure it works in the way. And I would say, if you have a setup in mind and you don't need, or maybe you need a specialty box from Goodwood or something, and you want to do all this cool routing, and you get the box from them, if you're going to assemble it yourself, plug it all in, without it being on the board, lay it on the carpet or on the floor or whatever. Make sure everything works in the way that you want it to work with the power and everything, and then assemble. That's a huge part. Is like, I'm a culprit of this too. Is like, I'll get so excited, I'll put down all the anchors and zip tie and tie everything down without checking some stuff, and then like I get done and you're just like, 4-letter word. Like, it's just like, you're just like, it's supposed to work. So that's what I say. Take your time and have fun.
And remember that tone is a 4-letter word.
Exactly. That's the one I was thinking of.
People
That's
forget
every
about
time.
that. People forget about that.
Tone.
Yeah, as we've said in previous episodes, that there's no shortcuts to Tone Town.
Nope.
And you got to take the scenic route. I know it's going to sound tired, and we're going to repeat it. And I agree with what both of you said. Is that we're really focused on the result. We want to get to the finish line, and sometimes these processes will favor the tortoise and not the hare. So bringing fables into this as well. So I would say that because I'm having a kid soon, so I needed to brush up on some of my fables.
Yes,
I like it.
But I would say that you definitely need to be in the process and vet the things that you're doing, and sometimes, again, as Grant said, going through the process of troubleshooting or of having to approach a problem and problem solve from multiple different angles. It will make you better at doing this the next time around, and that's just one more trick or tool that you have in your tool bag. And I think that that's really what distinguishes guys who do this professionally and effectively versus guys that are doing this as a hobby, is that we've gone through a lot of these cycles of mistakes and learning, and when we approach a problem, we now have 50 different solutions that we can throw at it, that we've endured over the course of building rigs for a prolonged period of time. And do feel free to use this as a resource. This is why, in part, we have this podcast to begin with. I know you can't put questions out on YouTube or on what are the podcast sites? You can't do it on
Apple.
Spotify. You can't do it on Apple.
Yep.
You can't pose questions there. But if you're watching us on YouTube, you can pose questions in the comments, or you can email any of us directly. I think in the show description notes on all of the podcasts, we also have our emails listed on our website, so you can reach out to us there if you're curious about ways to approach something. And again, you could always head to YouTube, put a comment that's associated with this particular video that we're doing about sort of the most complicated rigs we've ever built, and one of us will answer it or direct it to whoever it is that you want to answer the question if it's not for all three of us to answer. So don't be bashful about doing that. That's the intent and purpose of what we're doing here today, and ultimately, we want you to make it to Tone Town without any accidents.
I'll say we also do post, the day of these are live, of our thumbnails and stuff. If you have questions on social media, you can ask us there too. I mean, that's another big spot. Yeah,
because usually sometimes all of us, or at least some of us, are involved in the live chat while these are going and being posted live on YouTube. So you can engage in the chat there, and we can talk about your rig.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned. Until next time, we will see you.
See you guys.
Later. Bye.